Hey, my writing teacher, we used to be roommates with them in college. My college writing teacher was roommates with them. Before that, he was like, oh, dude, those guys suck.
Really?
God.
Oh, it's like gummies.
It's December. Can we all?
Easy. Oh. You really should make yourself one.
Unbelievable. Nespresso. What else?
At Verizon, we'll pay off your old phone. And you'll get iPhone 16 on us.
I'm going on this date, and I'm going to let this gentleman give me the business.
Why are you telling me this?
Because I know it bothers you.
This is How I Met Your Dad, not to be confused with the 2022 television series How I Met Your Father. Nearly a decade before Hulu launched Hilary Duff's spin-off, Fox had tried breathing life into a completely different spin-off that never made it past the pilot episode. The failure wasn't only due to How I Met Your Mother's poorly received finale, but rather due to the fact that How I Met Your Dad falls for the same trap that so many sitcom spin-offs fall for time and time again.
Same thing. Same time. Same
What?
thing.
Either of you, what's happening inside of the room?
In 2014, the only sitcoms that were really hitting their stride were Modern Family and the remarkably consistent New Girl. Shows like Parks and Rec and How I Met Your Mother were preparing for their respective series finales. During these moments, networks have big shoes and even bigger advertising coffers to fill, which brings us to a moment in the entertainment industry known as pilot season. When it comes to greenlighting a sitcom, television studios can be relatively risk-averse. The simpler it is to explain your concept, the easier it is for studio executives to understand where it might fit into their content rotation. How I Met Your Mother was one of the most successful sitcoms on CBS's rotation. Creating a spin-off series likely seemed like a simple pathway to maintain a similar revenue stream. Hey, remember all that money we made with How I Met Your Mother? Let's do the same thing again.
Sweet, sweet $5, you're finally mine.
How I Met Your Dad should have been a slam dunk. The writing team of Craig Thomas and Carter Bays were returning from How I Met Your Mother, and they also brought on SNL alum Emily Spivey to help pen the script. The show features an attractive, charismatic cast and touches on some progressive themes. Writer and indie film darling Greta Gerwig was cast to play the show's central protagonist, Sally, with Meg Ryan providing the vocal talent for her older future self.
I've dusted off this typewriter to tell you the story of How I Met Your Dad.
Workaholics Anders Holm plays her ex-husband Gavin, and the show would have introduced us to an at-the-time unknown Drew Tarver and Andrew Santino. On paper, this feels like that right show, right time recipe that networks search tirelessly for with little to no avail. However, just because something looks good doesn't mean it's going to taste good.
You're gonna love it. Take a sip.
A Chardonnay. Todd, you're a professional chef.
The pilot episode of How I Met Your Dad is messy, to say the least. It feels completely rushed and comes off as if someone filmed an unedited rough draft of a screenplay rather than a fully conceptualized television show. While there are definitely a few charming moments peppered in throughout the episode's 22-minute runtime, the jokes feel largely flat, and the emotional core of the story is almost non-existent. The first 5 minutes of the show are like someone trying incredibly hard to get someone to like them despite their glaring red flags present the moment they walk into a room. If we compare this completely over-the-top scene to the first time we see McLaren's pub in How I Met Your Mother, we can see a stark contrast in how these locations are set up. McLaren's is introduced to us during a humorous and heartfelt conversation between Barney Stinson and Ted Mosby.
Ted, I'm going to teach you how to live. Barney, we met at the urinal.
All right.
This conversation sets up these characters in a grounded way, and the scene relies on the emotions and relationships to drive the comedy. The opening scene of How I Met Your Dad doesn't achieve any of this. It fails to tell us who these characters are to each other, why we should care about these characters, and most importantly, it fails to create characters that feel like real human beings. There is nothing endearing about disrupting a bar with a bullhorn for no reason other than having found a bullhorn. On top of that, what 20-something can afford to buy a bar that has reached maximum occupancy a round of shots? The writers spend almost zero time introducing us to this new cast, or telling us why we should care, and instead jump straight into these zany antics that haven't been earned in any way, shape, or form. Take, for instance, this ringtone bit at the top of the show.
This is my favorite song. It's set to ringtone called xylophone.
This is clearly inserted as one of the catchphrase bits that became so popular with How I Met Your Mother.
Audience, say it with me. Legendary.
These bits and catchphrases almost always serve to deepen the pre-existing character traits present in who we are observing on screen. The issue How I Met Your Dad runs into is that it seems to use these tropes to define their characters without doing any of the necessary developmental labor to actually make them feel real. Greta Gerwig's character didn't resonate with test audiences. In an interview with Stephen Colbert, she revealed that during one test screening, the audience was given a knob to turn to the right when they liked something and the left when they didn't like something.
Apparently, they turned the knob to the left every time I came on.
Rather than set up the series with Sally dealing with the insurmountable hardship that is ending a marriage to get us to care for and connect with her, the pilot essentially centers around her going out and finding a random guy to sleep with. That's not what most human beings would actually do. So, as this episode continues down this unrelatable rabbit hole, we actively become further separated from our protagonist. It's hard to connect with a character when they are constantly making objectively terrible decisions.
We're supposed to sleep together tonight.
Oh, God.
What do you mean, oh God?
At the end of the day, it seems like these veteran writers who created an absolute sitcom juggernaut phoned in this pilot. As time goes on, the writers get further and further away from taking that necessary first step, which is building a lasting foundation for the show to structure itself around. The best example of how it feels to watch the pilot of How I Met Your Dad comes at the end of the episode, where this new crew of characters all barge into Sally's apartment, shouting different reasons for Sally to care about something.
Marriage is beautiful. Checking your bathroom sinks, you're not going to die alone. Sharing your life.
You don't have to share towels.
It's a cacophony of catchphrases and shtick, telling us to care about something when we aren't even sure what it is yet. This is exactly what it feels like the showrunners would be doing in our living rooms if this show made it to air. On top of all that, the pilot ends by telling us exactly who the dad on How I Met Your Dad is. This effectively eliminates the primary writing convention and mystery that made How I Met Your Mother successful in the first place. CBS also took issue with the pilot, perhaps for the same reasons we've outlined today. However, they saw potential in the IP and wanted to retool the concept. Bays and Thomas would only reshoot if they got a series order commitment. When that never happened, the project fizzled. Tweets from 2013 show that the creators wanted this spin-off to stand completely separate from the original run. This is not the case for the new Hulu endeavor, with cameos, Easter eggs, and locations crossing over. Was this familiar ingredient what finally got the show out of production limbo?
That's a pretty weird challenge.
If there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I love a weird challenge.
Characters don't need shtick. They need depth. They need to feel relatable, to feel real. For those things to happen, they need to behave in ways that normal human beings behave. You can't have jokes without substance. You can't create comedy without relatability. If we can't connect ourselves to a character on an emotional level, we can never go along for the ride later on. And that's it for this one, folks. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. You might see a couple of links floating in the player window on your screen. Feel free to click any of those if you haven't done so already. And hey, thanks for watching Nerdstalgic.
I just had a 12-year-old boy soon appear at my front door.
Okay, so if we did the light coming down from this direction like this one came in from, well, kind of. This one probably came in from the top right here. Or there might be two. Because if it came in from this direction, this would light up. What if it came in from, then this should be darker. But if it came in towards the, over here, like this, then that would be, but then this back part would be darker. Well, not necessarily. Right? No, because if it was coming from like where this camera, where the light is source, this would have probably been lighter as well. This one comes in from the side, from us down, from that way down. Alright, let's try a double light source. But then these two kind of like combine, right? So it would be kind of light here. And this would be darker. And then, yep. But don't they? Yeah. It probably wouldn't work like that though, right? Alright. Mm. Oh yeah. Let me put something on.
What is the single children?
Perfecting your swing is hard.
Nice shot, Dad.
But replacing your windshield doesn't have to be. Go to safelight.com and we can come to you.
Sick.
Our highly trained techs can replace your windshield where you are, even if that's right in your driveway.
Have a good day. I love you.
SafeLight makes it easy. Go to safelight.com and schedule a replacement today.
What is the single children's or YA book series that gave you the most trauma? You know what I mean. The ones you love but still left you clutching your stuffed animals or beanie babies or whatever and staring wide-eyed up at your ceiling all night. Now, from Harry Potter to Watership Down, there are plenty of contenders. But let me tell you, there's one series that took this concept and absolutely ran with it. And I'm, of course, talking about none other than the Animorphs. This incredible series dominated the 90s and was practically a staple in every single bookstore, library, and scholastic book fair. And pound for pound, it's probably hands down one of the darkest of the popular series aimed at younger audiences from that era. Now, if you only read a couple of Animorph books way back when, or if you can only just remember those unhinged but also gloriously 90s covers, you might be surprised just how trauma-inducing this series actually was. Because, hey, it starts off simple enough, just kids who can morph into animals, but quickly pivots into the horrors of war, alien genocide, and PTSD, but also simultaneously really bizarre things like space broccoli and eating through hooves. But it's also so much more than that. It's grounded in deeply human themes, fascinating world building, and an unforgettable sense of dread mixed with adventure. And over the years, the fandom has remained fiercely dedicated, and there's even been some attempts to revitalize the series, along with some, let's say, interesting adaptations. So in this video, we'll explore its brutal high-stakes premise, its wild history, and the strange adaptations, and finally where everything stands today to discover whatever happened to the Animorphs. Hi everyone, my name is Otto, and welcome to Exits Examines. We'll be exploring series, franchises, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a like and subscribe button below, and I want to give an enormous shout out to my patrons who make this channel possible. You guys rock. Also, quick heads up, light spoiler warning for the Animorphs, although I'll give a larger spoiler warning before I start talking about the really spoiler stuff. Alright, there's a metric ton to unpack with this series, and trying to explain Animorphs to the uninitiated, well, things can get complicated really fast, but let's start at the basics. Animorphs is a book series written by Katherine Applegate and her husband, Michael Grant, that absolutely took the 90s by storm. It sold over 35 million copies and became a staple of scholastic book fairs, and it was a must-have for any kid at the time. Now, on the surface, it's easy to see why. It's a fun, action-packed adventure series about kids who can turn into animals to fight off an alien invasion, and that's some 90s catnip gold right there. But beneath all the cool morphine and sci-fi adventure, it's so much more than that. At its core, Animorphs is a war story. It's about morality and the cost of violence. Children lose limbs, make impossible decisions, and grapple with trauma, and it pushes far beyond what you'd expect from a typical kids series. It's all messy, brilliant, and there's just nothing else quite like it. So what's actually going on here in the story? Honestly, it's hard to know where to start because this series takes some truly insane twists and turns, but essentially Animorphs is about an interstellar war between aliens, PTSD, and of course a group of idiot teenagers with a death wish. Now the story begins innocently enough, just 5 teenagers walking through a construction site on a regular night, but any sense of normalcy is violently and viscerally ripped away when a literal alien spaceship crash lands in front of them. Out of the wreck emerges a dying space centaur prince, which, yes, that's a thing, who tells them 3 very bad pieces of news. 1, there's a galactic war going on. 2, the bad aliens are already on Earth and they're infesting human brains. And 3, these teenagers are now humanity's only hope. Oh, and before he dies, he grants them a final gift/curse to morph into any animal they touch. And by dies, I mean Visser 3, the big bad of the series, immediately and graphically shreds him in front of the kids' horrified eyes, with his cries of agony haunting the gang for the rest of their lives. So yeah, this series has gone from 0 to 100 real fast. And if you think things are going to slow down from here, well, I admire your optimism. So speaking of tonal whiplash, this wild duality of normalcy versus brutality is always present in the series, and I can't help but wonder how many well-meaning parents picked up these books for kids thinking, oh, what a cute story about animal transformations, only to accidentally traumatize their children for the rest of their lives. Even within a single book, the tone swings hard. Things often start low stakes, our core group of friends morphing into fun little animals, watching movies together, and pulling at our heartstrings. But by the end of the same book, there's full-on chaos with them getting into brutal fights. And when I say brutal, I mean absolutely metal. Our characters get shot at, pummeled, stabbed, and sometimes ripped apart in horrifying detail, with too many examples to even mention, but with the first one coming to mind when the gang morphs into ants and proceeds to get dismembered in horrifying detail by a rival colony of ants. So some of the more astute among you might wonder, how do these kids survive being maimed and physically shattered on a regular basis, which is a great question. But in order to answer that, we need to dig into what is even going on with the alien war and the bigger picture of the story. Because Animorphs isn't just some formulaic, episodic Saturday morning cartoon. This is a galaxy-spanning narrative epic. So buckle up, because is about to get weird. The Animorph books are canonically mostly set in the 90s, but more importantly take place during a galaxy-spanning war between Centaur aliens, aka Andalites, and mind-controlling space slugs, aka the Yeerks. So who are these guys? Well, the Andalites are highly advanced, fiercely proud, and the creators of morphing technology, which allows living creatures to transform into any animal they've touched. They really seem like the good guys at first, but like with everything in this series, it's not that simple. Then, on the other hand, there are the Yeerks. Oh boy, those gosh darn Yeerks. The Yeerks are a classic alien concept of the parasitic slug, being these tiny, frail creatures, but they more than make up for it with their ability to crawl into other beings' brains and take full control of their body, which is absolutely terrifying when you realize that when a Yeerk controls a host, the host mind is still alive and fully conscious. You're essentially a prisoner in your own body, screaming silently while the Yeerk controls everything you say and do, which, again, this is a kid series. Now, the Yeerks aren't just messing around with humans. They've already enslaved multiple races, with one of the most terrifying examples being the Orc-Bajir, a peaceful creatures turned into walking death machines by their Yeerk masters. They're basically armored shock troops with blades sprouting from their arms, legs, and tails. Now, it's important to note that some species willingly allied with the Yeerks, like the Taxons, which are giant centipede-like monsters with an insatiable hunger. Now, bringing this back to Earth, the Yeerks have already infiltrated a large portion of the human population, and anyone could be a controller, which is a human host with a Yeerk in their brain. So your teacher could be a Yeerk. The cops, probably Yeerks. Even the President of the United States? Well, don't worry, the series will get to that. And this paranoia creates an incredible tension throughout the series. The Animorphs can trust almost no one, although this is offset just a little by their morphine powers. Now, you can tell Applegate had an absolute blast writing the morphine scenes. Each transformation is pure gold, with every animal feeling unique with its own instincts and priorities, and some of them are just so fun. When the gang morphs into animals, they kind of become the animal, so cats are really aloof, dolphins love to play, and red-tailed hawks love flying on thermals, which is where air rises due to heat. And that alone has become something of a meme in the community because one of the characters really likes thermals. But like with everything in the series, morphine is not just some breezy superhero-style power. Oh, no. It's a grotesque, visceral experience. The characters don't just change into animals, they feel their bones shatter and reform, skin warping, organs rearranging, and although painless, the halfway point between humans and animals is often described as an absolute abomination. But the struggle isn't just physical, there's mental battles too. The first time you morph, you have to fight against the animal's instincts, and you could lose yourself entirely trapped in its mind. And this is a big problem because of the huge risk of morphine is that if you stay in a morph longer than, say, 2 hours, you're stuck forever as that animal. But on the plus side, every time you morph, your body is fully healed, which is how the Animorphs survive getting maimed, eviscerated, and dismembered on a semi-regular basis. Now, our team of child soldiers uses battle morphs, which is basically like tigers and bears when they fight, but also use smaller morphs for espionage and reconnaissance, which is all extremely helpful in their brutal, no-holds-barred proxy war with themes of trauma, pain, and the horrors of conflict running throughout the entire series. And nowhere are these themes more powerfully explored than with the Animorphs themselves. So, who are they? Well, we got Jake, who is the group's natural but reluctant leader, and as the war drags on, he steps up, accepting the crushing weight of responsibility, but struggling to deal with the impossible decisions he's forced to make. Rachel, his cousin, on the other hand, embraces the violence, at least on the surface. She's beautiful, fierce, and often described as an Amazonian warrior, but as the series progresses, her addiction to combat and chaos becomes kind of disturbing. Tobias is a loner from the start, and early in the series, he stays in morph too long and gets stuck as a red-tailed hawk forever. His story is kind of equal parts tragic and fascinating as he grapples with this new reality, and my guy really loves those thermals I was talking about earlier. Then we have Ax, short for Aximili Escruth Istil, and he is the lone Andalite. His perspective is a real highlight for the series, with his alien worldview making for some genuinely great moments. To blend in, he often morphs as human and quickly becomes obsessed with eating food, since Andalites don't have mouths, instead eating with their hooves, which, anyway, he quickly becomes addicted to cinnamon buns, which again has become a thing of meme beauty. Marco is the team's critical thinker, and he's always smart and ready with a sarcastic quip. He initially doesn't want to fight the war because, understandably, he's terrified of leaving his depressed father alone after already losing his mother due to a freak accident, which, yeah, because this is the Animorphs, that plot point eventually gets super dark. Cassie is the group's moral compass. She's empathetic, highly skilled with morphine, and constantly wrestling with the ethical implications of the war. Now, what makes all of them so compelling is how they change over the course of the story. The Herculean task of saving the world against impossible odds completely and irrecoverably shatters their innocence. They grow and break, and their arcs are some of the most intense and believable I've ever seen in a children's series. Now, major spoiler warning for the next 5 to 8 minutes. Now, for most of the series, the Animorphs keep their identities and a mission a complete secret, even from their own families, because they can't tell who's a controller and who's not. So while they're going to school, attending gymnastics, or doing totally normal kid stuff, they're also fighting a war to save humanity. And if it's not already obvious, this isn't just some lighthearted Power Rangers scenario. Their lives slowly start to unravel as they desperately try to balance this impossible tightrope. Now, this is all exacerbated when the series constantly puts them in excruciatingly difficult situations, both emotionally and morally. Their friends and family sometimes get taken over by the Yeerks, leading to some devastating consequences, and things go wrong, sometimes horribly wrong, all the time. In one book, Jake gets infested by a Yeerk, and the group realizes that the only way to free him is to starve the Yeerk out. So Jake has to endure 3 days of hearing the Yeerk rage, plead, and slowly die inside his own head, all while he's forced to listen to every single one of its morbid thoughts. And that's not even the only time something like this happens, since there's a whole sub-arc involving David, and oh my god, David is just an entirely other thing. He was basically brought onto the Animorphs because they had no choice, but to make an extremely long, multiple book-spanning story short, he betrays them, does some pretty horrendous things, and the gang is eventually forced to deal with him somehow, and they have a moral debate about if they should just, kill him, and instead decide to trap him forever as a rat, which doesn't make them killers, but geez, just by the tiniest degree. And then there's an entire book where Tobias is trapped in a tiny cage being graphically tortured. He's hooked up to a machine that cycles between pain and euphoria until he's nearly driven insane. Even after he escapes, and yeah, I know I've said this a lot, but Kit used to be saying this, he's forever scarred by the experience. And the stress of these traumatizing events and fighting a secret war eventually breaks and changes the team. Cassie actually quits the Animorphs at one point because it's all just too much for her, and Jake and Rachel hit their breaking points more than once, struggling under the enormous pressure of leadership. And Tobias, well, he's stuck as a hawk with this interesting subplot where he has confusing feelings for another female hawk, and there's even a scene where he succumbs to the hawk's instincts and eats a rat, feels pure joy, and immediately spirals into a psychotic breakdown because he thinks the bird is taking over. Charming stuff, right? Which again, this is a kid's book, by the way. So by the end of the series, these aren't the same wide-eyed kids we met in the early books. They been through it all. Their innocence is long gone, replaced with deep emotional scars that will stay with them throughout their entire lives. And you best believe that the ending escalates everything. All right, so let me give you one of my favorite things, a wildly oversimplified summary of the story. For most of the Animorphs, the team is basically running a guerrilla war. They're sabotaging the Yeerks wherever they can, stalling for time, and hoping that the Andalites, their supposed cavalry, will show up and save the day. But of course, things slowly but surely go off the rails. Now, eventually, the Animorphs are forced to blow their cover. They have to reveal everything, their powers, the alien war, and the whole terrifying truth, first to their families and eventually the entire world. This, of course, sets off a chain reaction, leading to a near-nuclear war between the US and China, and finally a full-scale hot conflict between the Yeerks and the remaining uninfested humans. The team is forced to make new Animorphs to bolster their numbers, recruiting willing, disabled children who in turn turn into literal cannon fodder. So yes, disabled children cannon fodder is a thing in this book series. Anyway, the Animorphs end up bombing a Yeerk pool, which is a success, but results in mass civilian casualties and the destruction of the Animorphs' hometown. And from there, the moral lines only get more and more blurred until they're basically non-existent. Jake becomes a cold, ruthless leader with almost no compassion left, and Rachel becomes a full-on killer. Every character you've grown to love is breaking, and not just by a little. They're morally gray at best and downright terrifying at worst. And then the final battle is brutal, dark, devastating, and a total gut punch. Victory comes, but at a horrific cost. Thousands of civilians, children, and soldiers are dead. And then the moment that probably haunted millions of wide-eyed, innocent readers was when the fan favorite Rachel sacrifices herself, and she dies after a violent and desperate battle, with the description of her final moments being absolutely heart-wrenching. Quote, "The human was silenced. No begging, no pleading for life. At the end, acceptance came even to this strong, turbulent spirit. You said I could ask one more question. Did I make a difference? My life and my death? Was I worth it? Yes. You were brave, you were strong, you mattered. Yeah. Okay then. Okay then. A small strand of space-time went dark and coiled into nothingness." End quote. The Yeerks are ultimately defeated, but at an enormous cost to humanity, the world, and of course our shattered heroes. And the final books are this raw, unflinching exploration of the necessity and futility of war. Every character is broken by the conclusion, and it's rare to see a YA series so fundamentally destroy its main cast with such brutal honesty. But that's probably a big reason why Animorphs continues to endure, because it doesn't really pull punches. It tackles incredibly mature adult themes head-on, reminding us that some of the most impactful stories for kids are the ones that refuse to sugarcoat the truth. But if you thought Animorphs was done, it still had one last gut punch, a massive cliffhanger that seemed like the start of yet another war. And just to drive home the point of the series again, in the words of Applegate, quote, "Animorphs was always a war story. Wars don't inhabit, not ever. Often relationships that were centered during war dissolve during peace. Some people who were brave in war are unable to handle peace, feel disconnected and confused. Always people die in wars, and always people are left shattered by the loss of loved ones." End quote. So as much as Animorphs hits you hard with its themes and story, I think another huge reason why it's so beloved is the world building. It's not just well thought out, it's packed with these weird, terrifying, and sometimes downright baffling elements, all while staying somewhat grounded in cool sci-fi concepts. You've got high-speed light travel, dinosaur morphing, which, yes, seriously, alternate timelines, and just a ton of other awesome stuff. And the best part is that a lot of these world-building elements tie directly into the story itself. Take, for instance, the slow reveal of Andalite society and how maybe, just maybe, they're not the shining paragons of virtue they make themselves out to be. We first get a hint of this when Axe performs this morning ritual where he points his own scorpion tail at his throat, chanting that he'd gladly sacrifice himself for his people. But then, as we dive deeper into Andalite culture, we realize that they're not exactly opposed to a bit of interplanetary genocide for the quote-unquote greater good. Then there's the Yeerk species. We get a deep dive into their hierarchy and political struggles, and what makes them stand out is that they're not just these mindless evil creatures. They have their own reasoning and insights that make them really empathetic. Quote, "Do you see this? This is what I am without a host body. Helpless, weak, blind. Do you see those flowers? Do you hate me for wanting that? You hate me because I won't spend my life swimming endlessly in a sea of sludge, while humans like you live in a world of indescribable sections of the universe. So instead, they play proxy wars with their minions, with the Animorphs getting wrapped up in all of this and basically just being pawns in this galactic chessboard. There's also some wonderfully bizarre portions of world building, like the Chi, who were androids created by an advanced race of genius dogs. But because nothing in this universe stays happy for long, the Chi want to fight the Yeerk threat on Earth. So they go on a mission to break their pacifism, which is a thing. And this turns into a Doom-level scenario. Marco gets stabbed to death, which, don't worry, he comes back, and then the Chi android brutally wipes out dozens of Fort Bashir and controllers in such an intense manner that even Rachel, who's no stranger to violence, is moved to tears, and you guessed it, let's say altogether, is traumatized for the rest of her life. For more weird world building, Broccoli was brought to Earth by aliens, and I could really just go on and on. And this incredible and often wild mix of ideas, heavy-hitting themes, and sci-fi concepts is doubly incredible when you realize that the Animorphs consist of 54 books published between 1996 and 2000, which is an absolutely mind-boggling 11 books per year, which is even more insane when you realize that Applegate was quite literally writing an entire other series called Everworlds at the same time. Now, this makes slightly more sense when you realize that a good portion of the Animorph books were written by ghost authors, although still outlined by Applegate. Now, talking about the books, the original Animorph covers are just absolutely iconic. And honestly, I think it's safe to say that these bizarrely awesome covers was probably the reason a lot of us picked up the books in the first place, just trying to understand WTF this is. And as a bonus, if you flip through the pages fast enough, you'd see a crudely animated flipbook effect of the transformation happening on the bottom corner of every page, which is such a fun little detail. As for the writing, each book switches up the point of view, so we get to see the world through the eyes of different characters every time, which keeps things fresh and lets us dive into each of their personalities in a unique way. Now, you might be wondering how this wild mix of animals, sci-fi, and war trauma came together, and it kind of makes more sense when you realize it wasn't just one person behind it all. It was actually a husband and wife writing team, with Applegate saying she wanted to write a series about animals, and Grant wanting to write a sci-fi story. So they just kind of used these two ideas together in a Frankenstein way, deciding that a science fiction premise was the best way to get kids into the heads of animals, which is nice and all, but also makes you wonder if making a war drama with PTSD and child soldiers was also the best way to do this. But I'm not arguing, because Animorphs holds up extremely well even as an adult reader, and this is probably one reason why the series' popularity exploded during the 90s. And it's hard to understate the massive success this series was, probably in no small part to the Scholastic book fairs, and since this was a Scholastic book, it had heavy marketing in TV and bookstores. So if all this talk of war and sci-fi has you feeling a little overwhelmed, let me cheer you up with something that's guaranteed to make you happy. Stickers. Seriously, who doesn't love stickers? And better yet, handcrafted, beautifully designed stickers of animals and cryptids by independent artists. Well, that's where Catbugs comes in. Every month they create new sticker designs and mail them out to subscribers worldwide. They're inspired by mythical creatures and folklore, and the art draws from mythology, storytelling, with designs that range from delightfully creepy to downright gorgeous. And my personal favorite is a cute little kitsune that looks amazing on just about anything. They even host polls sometimes, so you can help decide future designs. And the best part is that it's super affordable. For just $4 a month, you get exclusive stickers mailed straight to your door, making them perfect for gifting. I'm really excited to support these folks. So use the code below, treat yourself or friends, and support small artists while getting some seriously lovely stickers. So what actually makes up the series? Now, if you thought the reading order would be straightforward, you clearly haven't been paying attention, and go ahead and dunk yourself in a Yeerk pool, because Animorphs is sprawling. We're talking about 54 books on the mainline series alone, with different arcs, different writers, tones, and subplots. It sounds overwhelming at first, but the books are pretty short, so it's not the huge time sink it looks like at first glance. And this all begs the question, do you need to read every single Animorphs book? And this is a bit tricky, because each book does generally move the plot forward, even if it's just by an inch, but some do it much more meaningfully than others. And the fact that a pretty significant chunk of them were written by ghostwriters, and well, it's complicated, because some of these, not all of them mind you, but some definitely feel like filler. A few plot lines definitely could have been condensed, and others, like the auxiliary Animorphs, the Yeerk peace movement, and the whole in-game and aftermath, could have used way more breathing room to really hit home. But given how much of a money-printing juggernaut this series was at its peak, and it's honestly surprising we didn't end up with hundreds of books, and Scholastic satisfying, if not definitive, ending. Thankfully, there are fantastic guides out there that split the series into essential, recommended, and skippable books, and I'll link a few of these below. And if you're a diehard completionist and want to read the whole thing in chronological order, Seropedia has an excellent breakdown, which I'll link below as well. So speaking about the side books, because if the war, dismemberment, and time travel in the mainline series wasn't enough for you, don't worry, there's more. Actually, a whole lot more. And surprisingly, a lot of it is actually pretty tasteful additions worth reading, with some wild and sometimes horrifying backstory. First of all, we got the 4 Megamorph books, which are kind of like summer blockbustery style stories. Fun, but usually without lasting effects on the story. Honestly, you probably could skip these entirely if you want to, but I'd be lying if I said they weren't fun. Tobias literally kills Hitler in one of them. Yes, you heard that right. And somehow, a book where one of the main characters kills Hitler is a side book and isn't even considered essential reading by most fans. And if that doesn't perfectly sum up how beautifully insane the series can be, I don't know what is. With that said, the Megamorph books are great reads. Megamorph 2 is a fan favorite, and since all were written by Applegate herself, the quality tends to be a notch above some of the mainline books. But if you're going to read any of the side books, the Chronicles are probably the best bet. These books really dive into the backstories of major characters and alien factions, like the Yurks and the mysterious godlike Ellimist. Some of the information here might seem like extra fluff, but some of it is totally mind-blowing, completely recontextualizing the main series when you go back for a reread. Now, as for the Ellimist Chronicles, I'll admit I originally thought this book wasn't really necessary. I mean, I felt like he worked better as this mysterious cosmic force, but wow, it's actually totally worth it. This is Animorphs at its most hardcore sci-fi, blending concepts of fate, free will, and dabbling some really cool concepts like psychology and theoretical physics. Now, finally, we have the Alternamorphs, which is a weird one. It's a 2-book spin-off series done in a choose-your-own-adventure style. You play as the 6th Animorph making life or death decisions. Sometimes you win, sometimes you die, sometimes you get stuck forever in a morph, just like in the mainline books. And that all sounds cool, right? Well, unfortunately, they're not great. The endings are limited, and most of the stories are just rehashes of plots from the main series with you slapped in as a character. They don't really add anything to the overall story. But if you were one of those kids who always fantasized about joining the Animorphs team, these were the closest you could get to living that dream in true 90s choose-your-own-adventure fashion. But if you thought the Animorph books were done and dusted after the original run, well, my friend, in this age, anything that has made money will
Alright, guys.
truly die. And
Thank you for watching.
decided it was time to dip
Yep.
back into
See you guys next week.
re-release of the series.
Have a good one.
This new edition featured updated covers and revamped editions with some minor text updates to make the pop culture references that were sprinkled throughout the original